does, and that's another place where that
Which way to go? 3PL, third-party logistics, or brokerage services? Let's get an opinion from my guest today, George Abernathy. He is President and Chief Commercial Officer of Transplace. George, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
You know, these terms, broker and 3PL, they're often used interchangeably, but they really do mean something different, don't they? What are some of the differences as you define it?
Well, it is one of the maybe old sayings that you hear within our industry that one man's brokerage is another man's 3PL, but there are distinct differences. There are times when there are significant overlaps, and both are certainly intermediaries between the shipper and the carrier, but their roles can be very different. The broker typically is focusing on the execution of that individual shipment, that making sure that they are hitting a goal of cost and service for that particular shipment. The 3PL should be thinking more strategically. The partnership that they have with their shippers needs to think beyond that individual shipment and plan earlier in the supply chain for what might happen so that they have a better opportunity to avoid that spot market load.
Not to mention we get confusion when we talk about domestic versus international. I assume when we talk about a classic freight broker, it's essentially a surface transportation domestic entity, correct?
Absolutely, and very much a growing and burgeoning part of the industry today, which I think causes there to be even more question as to where that line between the 3PL and the broker really does start to merge. We've seen that as a 3PL, our investment in human capital, our investment in technology is extremely important. When you think about brokerage, there's investments, but the investments are oftentimes different. The investment in a technology would be different than what you'd see in the 3PL world.
So from the standpoint of a shipper, what are some of the advantages of working with one over the other?
Well, a shipper has the ability to work with both, and it really depends on what the shipper's looking for. If the shipper is looking for an ability to collaborate with other shippers, to be placed into a network of collaborative transportation, that's what you're going to get from a 3PL. A good 3PL will be able to do that. If that shipper is looking for some capacity that may be coming from a non-asset provider, there's a role for a broker. An example would be, we've got customers, we have shippers who will in fact use Transplace, but also in their transportation strategy use one or two brokers to provide 10 or 15% of their transportation so that when their network is needing to flex, whether it be seasonality or other flexes, that provider, that non-asset provider, can flex more easily than the asset provider can do so.
Of course, we don't always think of a 3PL necessarily as an asset provider. There are non-asset 3PLs, so that adds a little bit more confusion to the mix.
It does, and that's another place where that line does blur. But typically, when you talk about a non-asset provider, a broker will really never have any assets. The 3PL may have assets of one type. There may be brick and mortar, there may be some wheels on the ground. That broker very much is a non-asset. So when we're running a bid for a customer or a group of customers, we'll run scenarios and talk through the opportunities that are brought when we're thinking about a non-asset strategy. What percentage of the market do they want to be utilizing a non-asset play? Does their network support a 10 or a 15%? Or should they be using more of an asset play? As we work our way towards what many people are eventually going to call capacity Armageddon, as we work our way towards that, very important for a shipper, whether they're working with a 3PL, whether they're working with a broker, or whether they're working with both, to be thoughtful about that capacity tightening and what their strategy will be when we get there.
Well, that's a good point, because shippers need to be in a position to have very good relations with carriers when capacity is tight. They want carriers to be taking their business as opposed to their competitors. So who has the more valuable or the broader relations with carriers typically? Is that a 3PL over a broker, or is that too much of a generalization?
No, I think it's a great question and a great point. In the broker situation, that broker should be providing connectivity, whether that be electronic, the internet, or otherwise, You're seeing many apps providing that too. That broker needs to be connecting to thousands of carriers, the small and medium-sized carriers, to provide a large network, a large group of carriers to the shipper. The shipper using a 3PL or the shipper going directly to carriers will oftentimes use more of the larger providers or more of the large and medium-sized providers. So there's definitely a place for both. The broker can provide capabilities from thousands of carriers, oftentimes the small carriers, the mom and pops, who need to find a way to be able to integrate into a larger entity. The 3PL will more often be connecting to larger carriers or the medium-sized carriers that will have longer-term relationships with that shipper. So they both have a place within the model.
So what are some questions that a shipper should be asking itself in trying to decide which way it goes, 3PL or broker?
They don't have to go 3PL or broker. I think it should be 3PL and or broker. I think that there's a definite need to become involved in a larger scale entity. That's where the 3PL can play. But don't shut yourself out from the broker opportunity because you've chosen that 3PL. Think about what percentage of your network, as you're looking at those non-asset players, do those non-asset players have the references? Do they have the customer base for you to be comfortable that if you're going to move part of your network with them, that they'll be able to provide the service and cost you're looking for?
Mm-hmm. You're up against all the time changing regulations and changing fuel prices, all kinds of things in which the transportation landscape is in fact changing all the time. Is it a question that both the broker and the 3PL can theoretically be on top of those things, or is that level of intelligence something that a higher level type of provider is better off providing to a customer?
I think both can address their areas effectively. The 3PL will be looking strategically, will be thinking about what's going to occur next year, and will be looking at the networks of their customers so that they can put together scale or consortiums to think around what may be occurring further downstream. The broker certainly should be thinking about the future as well, but that future may be tomorrow, it may be Monday, it may only be a week away, but we can't just live on today. They need to be thinking about the future as well, but the time frames are really a significant differentiator between the broker and the 3PL model.
And then to throw the matter into even greater confusion, there is the so-called 4PL, or the lead logistics provider, or whatever you want to call it, that usually is non-asset based, as I understand it, and functions at a very high level, overseeing a number of different underlying partners, which I assume could consist of 3PLs or brokers. So they're not out of the mix necessarily just because a 4PL's on the scene, right?
Absolutely. And that 4PL term, that global load control center, providing visibility from a very large number of inputs, certainly can support both the 3PL and the broker model. Typically, it will support the 3PL, the broker, the warehouse management, the order management, any number of these systems, any number of these inputs being brought together, so that what that global load control center or that 4PL is providing is visibility from all of those disparate systems. So certainly the 3PL and the broker model works very well within the 4PL or the global load control center.
And as we look to the future and we see trends developing, rising fuel prices, more and more regulations, shrinking capacity, more and more challenges, margins tightening on the part of the service providers too, does the future hold a picture in which both brokers and 3PLs continue to coexist side by side?
I think so, and I think it's very important that brokers and 3PLs work together. As we work with our customers, if our customer asks us to work with an asset provider, we'll work with an asset provider. If they're asking us to work with a broker, we'll work with a broker. We'll counsel them. As the capacity marketplace changes and Armageddon or tightening, whether it be regionally or more expansively across the entire United States, is going to occur. It's incumbent upon that shipper to be thoughtful around their strategy, because what's working for them today may not work for them downstream.
George, thank you so much for providing us with what is a very nuanced picture of the whole question of 3PL versus broker, and maybe not even versus, but with the two coexisting. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Bob.
I've been speaking with George Abernathy of Transplace. Thank you very much for watching.